Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Music is a Journey. I'm Peter Scove. Today I want to talk about the albums that I have in my collection that are from 1985, albums that are turning 40 years old this year. I previously did one on albums of 1975 that I have in my collection. However, I noticed an interesting difference. I have something like 35 albums from 1975. I have under 25 albums from 1985, which is really weird because I was 14 years old in 1985 and I know I was already becoming an avid music collector even with what limited funds that I had available. I started buying cassettes in 1983, so by 1985 I was pretty much on a roll and keeping up with things. One of the things I noticed was that bands that I was really into in the 1980s, first of all, a lot of those bands didn't actually release albums or studio albums in 1985. So just taking a look at the list, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Nazareth, Queensryche, Whitesnake, Voivod, Scorpions, Triumph, Zebra, Metallica, Deep Purple, and Anvil. All of these bands had released albums in 84 or at least 83, and they were out busy touring or doing whatever in 1985. Granted, Scorpions and Iron Maiden did release live albums in 85, but I'm going with studio albums here. As well then, there were a lot of bands whose albums from 1985 I had on cassette in the 1980s. However, I haven't gotten around to getting them on CD, or it just hasn't been a priority, or I just don't really feel that I need to get them on CD. And truth be told, there were a lot of bands that I liked in 83 and 84 whose 85 releases didn't really impress me. So this list here, this includes bands whose albums I did have. Whether I actually like them or not, I'm not going to say. But there was Motley Crue, Theater of Pain. That one I can say I really don't need to get on CD. Dio, Sacred Heart, Accept, Metal Heart, Night Ranger, Seven Wishes. Honestly, it was probably the poppiest of the first four Night Ranger albums, and I had all four of them. But for some reason, I've been thinking I might want to get that one. Megadeth, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good. Of course, I had that on cassette back in the day. Kiss Asylum, that was the first ever Kiss album I bought. AC/DC, Fly on the Wall. 780 Degrees Fahrenheit by Bon Jovi. Not metal, I know. Stryper, Soldiers Under Command. Aerosmith, Done with Mirrors. Do I want it or not? I'm not really sure. And Possessed by Venom. I remember there were some issues with the production on that. The sound quality was not that great. And then, of course, there were a lot of bands. I have albums of theirs on CD now, or I had the cassettes back then, or both, but I didn't have their 1985 releases. And that includes bands like Omen, Watchtower, Artillery, Trouble, Rat, Saga, White Lion, Uriah Heep, Savatage, Armored Saint, Dokken, Coney Hatch, Fate's Warning, Saxon, Wasp, Overkill, Twisted Sister, Halloween, and Marillion. I could also name a bunch of albums that were released in 85 by bands who played the kind of music that I liked. However, I just never had their albums at all. But instead of talking about all the things I don't have, let's get on with what I do have. I noticed while preparing this, a lot of what I do have, I'd say the majority, certainly over 50%, is more in the, I guess you'd call it the extreme metal subgenre. We've got some thrash, first wave black metal, if you want to call that a genre or an era or whatever. That kind of extreme metal stuff anyway, speed metal, really early beginnings of death metal, that sort of thing. And the rest of them fall into either metal or non-metal, like, I don't know what you want to call it, if it's hard rock or if it's more like pop rock or whatever. But anyway, let's get on with it here then. That's enough yattering for this introduction. So first up, I have Slayer, Hell Awaits, and this remains my favorite Slayer album, although actually I only have a few. For me, as I've said before, this album here, I think it is one of the early stepping stones going towards death metal. Yes, Slayer is part of the big four, they're part of the thrash metal thing, but the one thing that Slayer made Slayer different from the other thrash metal bands like Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax, and some of the other ones as well. First of all, the satanic imagery was on there a lot, so that put them more in line with what a lot of the European bands or even Japanese bands were doing, Brazilian bands and so on. And as well, the lyrics here, a lot of the lyrics are kind of horror story or hell story type lyrics, which again was different from what the typical thrash metal band was doing. So I see Slayer's Hell Awaits as an important album, taking those early steps, breaking away from thrash and heading towards death metal. Definitely still on the thrash metal side though, and that's just my opinion. Also, of course, Exodus finally getting their debut album out in 1985. I think I read somewhere that it was actually recorded in 1984. It just took almost a year to get it out. Still my favorite Exodus album, although I actually only ever have heard about 3 or 4 of them. I did like their more recent one from a couple of years back quite a bit, but a lot of their later stuff in the 80s turned me off and I lost interest in the band altogether. Bonded by Blood, though, this is an excellent thrash metal album from the early 80s, definitely, or mid 80s by this point. Then we've got Anthrax with Spreading the Disease. I've always liked this one, and AIR is one of my favorite Anthrax songs. So, Morbid Visions by Sepultura, it is actually a 1986 release. However, this edition here, it comes with, includes Bestial Devastation EP, which make up the last few tracks on here. The Bestial Devastation EP was actually from 1985. And again, we're looking at the darker side of extreme thrash metal, speed metal. This is when Sepultura were kind of in that group of that early, anyway, that first wave black metal as it is referred to often. And also we've got over in the UK Onslaught with Power from Hell, Onslaught's debut album, and again, one that is listed in that group of that first wave black metal type scene there. I only picked this up a couple of years ago there, but it's quite good. And there was a big 4 of British thrash, was it a big 3? Anyway, that's the only one that I have. Possessed, 7 Churches. Now this one I did get when it first came out, and boy did I ever really like this. But yeah, and a very important album for thrash metal, extreme metal, and death metal. Often said to be the first death metal album, and others say that it is still too thrashy to be death metal. And there's a song on here called Death Metal anyway. But yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's thrash or death. This is definitely an album that is important in the steps towards death metal. And in fact, as I've said before also, when Creator were recording their album Pleasure to Kill in 1986, they told their producer they wanted the album to sound something like Possessed, 7 Churches or Slayer's Hell Awaits. So there we go. I guess an important triad, trio of albums in those early days, moving from thrash metal into death metal. And again, over from Germany here, Destruction with their Infernal Overkill album. And honestly, this is the only Destruction album I've ever had. I had it on cassette in the 80s, and a few years back picked it up on CD. I am still thinking I should check out a couple of other Destruction albums maybe. I believe they're still around and active, so certainly I should hear what their more recent stuff sounds like. I always liked this album too. Sounded very different from the American style of thrash metal. Very big one here, To Megatherion by Celtic Frost, one of the 2 Celtic Frost albums that I really like. The other one is Morbid Tales. This one is really great, and I love the addition of the opera singer in one song and the heavy brass in a couple of tracks on here. Great, great album. And this one here also I picked up just back in 2023, I think it was, when I was looking into that first wave of black metal. Here is The Day of Wrath by Bulldozer. So again, one of those early, 1985 I think was a really big year for that ultra extreme metal that was coming out that time. As I said in my first wave black metal video, I feel that the typical thrash metal was a little more streamlined, like the City Road Racer, whereas the first wave black metal bands had more of this really rugged, rattling, Mad Max vehicle type feel to them. But anyway, there's Bulldozer. I think they were from Italy, were they not? And an album that I really fell in love with because I was the only one in my school who had it until my best friend got it. This is Bathory, The Return. I still remember going into the shop one day and looking at their metal section with all these different pictures of, you know, muscular dudes fighting, or demons and devils and hellish scenery and all that, and then seeing this, the moon in the sky, and wondering, all right, what on earth is this all about? And I bought it, took it home, and it was like, holy crap. What are these guys doing? So yeah, Bathory's first 4 albums, the debut and the third and the fourth, are often cited as being very important in the development of the second wave of black metal, but I've always loved The Return the best, especially Born for Burning, Sadist, Total Destruction. There's a lot of... I just still love this album. Another one I picked up just back in 2023, finally, this is Kreator's Endless Pain, and on this reissue, for some reason, there's this dark shading on here. I thought it was just my CD, but I checked online. It seems that that's the case with some of them there. And I don't know if it's because this one also has these, what is it called, Blitzkrieg demos on here, as well as the original full-length album. It is a good album, but I feel most of the songs follow the same kind of chorus. Just basically be as aggressive as you can. I think the next album, Pleasure to Kill, had more style to the music. You can pick out the different songs better, but still, nonetheless, an important album in that extreme metal scene of the mid-80s. And slipping up to Canada, we'll take a look at Razor and their Evil Invaders. Bought this on cassette back in the day. One of my favorite Razor albums. I think I had 2 back then, and now I also have Violent Restitution, which I never had on cassette in the day. I still love this one a lot. Love the kind of like Terminator album cover. So that's, whoa, I almost dropped that. And that's Razor, slipping out of the slipcase. And Exciter with their Long Live the Loud album, which I think was their 3rd full-length album. Honestly, I haven't heard this one as much. I got it, I listened to it, I liked it, I probably heard it a couple of times, so I can't tell you too much about this one here, but again, if it's not thrash metal, it's certainly in the kind of, you know, speed metal type category, and Exciter's first 2 albums are, you know, usually the ones that show up on the lists of exciting metal music from the 80s. But I see this one mentioned from time to time as well. I think the person who did the artwork made the woman's arm like creepily long. Then, a band that I was really pleased to find out about back in the day. I read about them in Circus Magazine, just a small advertisement for their 2nd album, and that was Virgin Steel. Again, me and my best friend, I think we were the only ones who had any Virgin Steel albums. So this is Noble Savage, their 3rd full-length album, of course released in 1985. I think it was also the first one on a major label. And this version here is part of the reissue series of Virgin Steel. So they've got the modern logo up here. This logo was not on the original. And this reissue series folds out with the regular album on one disc, and then a bonus disc of additional material, plus the little booklet in the middle. I have most of these from the reissue series. That's pretty cool. And over in Japan, I don't have a lot of stuff from Japan from the 80s, but Anthem, their debut album, was released in 1985, one of the big 3 of 80s metal in Japan, with Loudness, Anthem, and Earthshaker. I recently actually sent this album, I think it was this album, along with an Earthshaker album to Alex at Beer and Vinyl, as a way of saying thank you for giving me money in the contest that I won on his channel. Then Manila Road, Open the Gates. I don't know what album of theirs this is. Is it their 4th or their 5th? Anyway, the band is moving away from that. I don't know. It's time for a topic for another video. But in that other video, I want to talk a little bit about the American heavy metal scene at the beginning of the 1980s. Here at Manila Road are, I guess they're still part of it, but they've changed their sound to the American, well, I guess it's the American power metal scene, isn't it? I think so anyway. This is a great album, and it was recommended to me by one viewer who used to frequently comment on my channel. I'm not sure if I've seen him around so much recently. But yeah, Manila Road opened the gates. Very cool album. Just picked that one up a couple of years ago. And now we're going to slip into the, arguably not heavy metal, maybe it's hard rock or whatever. But we've got Helix with Long Way to Heaven. Had this on cassette back in the day. Can't say it was my favorite Helix album, but a couple of years ago I was watching some video where people were talking a lot about Helix. I think Tim Derlington was on there, big Helix fan. And I felt, okay, I should pick up some Helix albums. And then yeah, not a lot available in Japan. This is the audio file recording remastered in high definition, but I think these in this series here, they were done after the Universal Fire, and I believe this one, along with other albums in the series, certainly No Rest for the Wicked, were remastered from CD, not from the original master tapes. This one here, as I recall, the sound quality is not so bad, but No Rest for the Wicked, even on this, audiophile, high quality thing, it doesn't sound good. This one's all right though. Okay, and another Canadian band, Kick-Axe, their second album, Welcome to the Club. Actually, I liked this one even better than Vices. Vices has some of my favorite Kick-Axe songs, but I felt there was some more diversity happening here. It wasn't always going on the heavy side. They were mixing in non-heavy stuff as well. And I just felt this album was taking a step in a different direction from everyone else. So that is Kick-Axe with Welcome to the Club. I have the Rock Candy issue, and it has a little bit of scratchiness on it that I noticed with some Rock Candy reissues. So I actually hunted down an earlier issue, pardon me, a CD that came out, I think it was in the early 2000s, and I don't remember what label it is right now. It just says Sony Music Special Products Compact Disc. Yeah, Sony Music Special Products, that's what it says. Anyway, the scratchiness that I hear on the Rock Candy version is not on this one, so I'm very happy that I was able to get that one. Wow, still in Canada. I think we're on a roll here with Canada. So this is April Wine, Walking Through Fire. This album was their contract fulfillment album. The band had essentially broken up, and only Miles Goodwin and every time I have to say his name in a video, I suddenly forget what it is, but I think it's Brian Greenwood. Jeez, pardon me if that's the wrong name. Anyway, they went into the studio with some studio musicians and recorded this album, which was to be the final April Wine album until they got back together a few years later. I really hesitated to get this because I just didn't hear any good things about it. However, I guess because my expectations were so low, I actually found I enjoyed some of the tracks on here, and there's one called Añejo or something like that. That is actually, I quite like that. They also do a really good cover of Open Soul Surgery from Prism's debut album. And there are a couple of other tracks in here that are quite good too. So actually not disappointed I got this Walking Through Fire here, April Wine. Also, I think I got a lot of these in 2023. Also, Lee Aaron, Call of the Wild, her third album and her second album officially released for Attic Records. Her debut album was later on bought and reissued on Attic Records. But third album altogether, Call of the Wild. This was, this remains, I think, in Europe, it remains one of the favorite albums of hers from the 1980s. Right, and actually the song Call of the Wild does not appear on the North American issue. It appeared, I think, as a bonus track or something, or an extra track, whatever, on the European issues. So the only way I can hear Call of the Wild is by listening to it on YouTube. Coming to the end, a few more albums to go. This one I just picked up last year. This is Y&T Down for the Count. Of course, I had this on cassette in the 80s. I loved Y&T, especially the albums from Earthshaker through to In Rock We Trust. Coming back to this one here, there are some songs, well, okay, one or two songs I didn't really like, but the rest of them actually are really good. This is a pretty darn good, solid rocking album. Summertime Girls, that was the really kind of poppy type one. And there's one here called American Boy, which Y&T really didn't need to do that one. Way too much poppy synthesizer and cheerfulness about it. But the rest of the album really rocks. I will say I don't care too much for the cover, and anyone else I've ever heard talk about this album will say the cover sucks. Yeah, so that's Y&T. This one I was just digging around and it turned up. I actually have not listened to this since I got it. This is Jolan Turner's debut album as a solo artist after, you know, Rainbow folded and Deep Purple got back together, and then Jolan Turner went and recorded an album on his own. It's called Rescue You. I got it probably back in 2006, 2007. I was on this big Deep Purple kick, and I was just trying to get albums by anybody and everybody who'd ever been in the band, and I ended up getting this one here. Probably it's okay, but let's see who's on here anyway. I don't know. Yeah, I haven't listened to it for probably over 15 years, but that's Jolan Turner's Rescue You. Jolan Turner starting a solo career in '85. And then of course Rush, Power Windows. Now it's funny thing, if you do a search on Google for heavy metal albums released in 1985, this comes up, and you'll know that this is probably Rush's most furthest away from heavy metal album they did ever, but certainly not a bad album. Never really been one of my favorites, although I do know a lot of people say it's really great. They love the music. Yeah, there are tracks on here I like Grand Designs and Manhattan Project and Marathon. I guess Big Money's kind of okay. But Neil Peart, he really liked this one here because he really liked the drumming and percussion that he did on this album. All right, and then one more to go. This is kind of an interesting one. This is Blue Oyster Cult's most lowest ranked album by nearly everybody. This is 1985, of course 1985. This is Club Ninja. At this point, I think there were only 3 of the original members left in the band, and one of them would leave during the tour. Produced by Sandy Pearlman, though. And this was an effort to try to make Blue Oyster Cult fit in more with what was happening in '85. And if you think about like the April Wine album or Uriah Heep's Equator, a lot of bands were really pushing, or maybe being pushed more towards this synth-heavy, popular, puppy type sound, moving away from their kind of, I guess, well, at least their heavier side, or more raw and rugged and rough and heavy side. This was the second Blue Oyster Cult album I ever bought, Revolution by Night being the first, and I probably would not have liked this album because of the 80s sounds on it, but there are actually a lot of songs I really liked. I finally bought the CD about 3 or 4 years ago, and White Flags, love that one. Dancing in the Ruins, very nice. Make Rock Not War, well, okay. Perfect Water is an excellent song. A lot of people will tell you that. I'm starting to sound like Donald Trump, aren't I? Spy in the House of the Night is okay. Beat 'em Up. What's his name now? Tom. Okay, so there's a guy who wrote the song. Okay, and okay, I gotta make a little sidestep here. Beat 'em Up. What's his name? Tom Halligan Jr. So Tom Halligan Jr. wrote Beat 'em Up, and that song is performed by both these artists in 1985. I don't know why Lee Aaron is singing a song called Beat 'em Up, and it's a kind of goofy song. When War Comes is okay. Shadow Warrior is pretty cool, and Madness to the Method is really, I think it's a great song with all that dramatic piano in it as well. So, yeah, the lowest ranked Blue Oyster Cult album, but actually an album that I always enjoyed back then. Back then it was like it was something different from everything else in my collection. I liked that when a band did something that was kind of outside of the territory of what most of the artists I had were doing. So I've always had a soft spot for this one, and I like the album, except for some of the 80s keyboards and drum sounds, electric drum sounds. Okay, that is it. That's my 1985 collection. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of albums that I used to have that I'm missing, and there are probably a lot of great ones that I just never had. So if there are any albums that you really love from 1985, why don't you tell me about it in the comments? And if you think, hey man, you really gotta have this one, all right, let me know and I'll check it out and consider it. Okay everyone, that's it. Thanks for watching my 1985 video, a mostly metal year. Catch you in my next video sometime soon. Have a great weekend. Bye.